Welcome to the Water Minds podcast. I'm Robert Touchton with MR Systems, Chief Design Officer, and I've got some subject matter experts in the area of security joining me. I've got Paul Forney with Schneider Electric. He's the Chief Security Architect. I've got Satya Gupta with Virsec. He's the Chief Technology Officer. And Saurabh, he is the Vice President of Industrial Controls. So right now with the current pandemic, a lot of the trend in the water and wastewater market, really with this shelter in place, seems like with them being essential employees and supporting the critical infrastructure, many of the times that, that I'm talking at conferences and things like that, I'm really going over the importance of water and that it is one of the most valuable resources. And I think with the current situation right now, it becomes really to the forefront, especially with the washing the hands. We're seeing a huge spike in water, the usage of water. So it is playing a major part in helping stop this pandemic. So one of the major trends is that these operators are having to really work remotely. So a lot of the infrastructures that have been more focused on security and this trend of digital transformation, they have the capabilities to securely support their infrastructure. But there's a majority of the customers that have been air-gapped that are really trying to scramble to support this remote access. And I wanted to really get the input from each of these subject matter experts on, the importance of really thinking through this as they try to extend their networks beyond the plant, and how whether it's privileged, employing some privileged access. And one of our key customers here in Atlanta, we've reached out to Versec and, using their software in the DMZ to support. And we're having plans to extend it beyond just the DMZ down into the plants. But we really felt like as a start, the most critical portion would be protecting the DMZ. So I'd like to start with Paul, just to get his take on, where during this time, where do you think the investment should be put in for security to support this type of remote capabilities?
Thanks again, Robert, for having me. I was trying to keep my noise down here. I have 2 dogs as well. And we're all working from home these days, right? So I don't know if you know this about me, but I started out in water and wastewater, and I designed the waterworks for the city of Lakeland and the city of Baltimore, Maryland, early on in my career. So I have a very, very good feel about water and wastewater and where it plays in our society today. So you asked me where we should be putting your money, right? So one of the big things that people tend to forget, I know we're going to be talking a lot about technology here, and you've got one of the best pieces of technology I know of right here, with Versec there. But you have to always think about your procedures, your policies, the way you're going to instruct your employees, the way they're going to be working remotely, right? So it's good to have the technology. You need to have good technology, but if those procedures are not clearly understood of how we're going to log in, how we're going to move information from the externally into the plant zones themselves, remember, you're not going to be doing this, you're not going to be carrying things in. And in a lot of ways, this is going to be even more secure for you if you follow the right procedures, So I started out early on in life work, like I said, when these plants have these remote pumping stations, that are very distributed over a very large geographical area. Very difficult to get to every one of them and, bring your laptop and have to do stuff. And the other thing I worked a lot in was in pipelines. So being able to go debug some problem in the pipeline 40, 50 miles down the road, in the middle of the night, you need to have good ways to do things remotely. So, and there are good ways, right? And there's good best practice to do, and I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about those today. So I'm not going to jump heavily into that right now, but just as a starter, I think you just cannot ignore all your policies and procedures as you get started in this new era we're in right now. This totally different thing that we haven't been faced with before. Right?
Yeah, I know with the I've actually been going through some of the certifications with the AWWA, with the risk and resilience, just trying to get up to speed, because I've had a lot of customers coming to me and asking, how do we actually adhere to this, or go, you mentioned the procedures, and it is kind of difficult because some of them it's not really clear cut. You have to take each of these plants, and the thing about water plants that I've seen over the 15 to 20 years that I've been in the industry is that they are very different. They're using different technologies, they're using different packages, so you really have to take each of them, like you're saying, and come up with some procedures. What type of users are they looking for? Control? Are they just looking to monitor? Can you push the data out so there's no traffic coming back in if they're just looking to get information? And then the users that you're wanting to have control, maybe you give them, privileged access through a DMZ, and you're actually controlling. So I think, that, like you're saying, that coming up with these procedures, it's going to adapt to each municipality. And there's really currently, estimated over 70,000 municipalities, and most of them currently are not equipped, really to handle any of this. And I was fortunate enough to meet Virsec at one of the Aviva conferences, and it was pretty impressive, their capabilities. And the key customer that I'm using them on right now here in Atlanta they filled a specific security issue, or not really an issue, but something that the customer needed secured, and they have a partnership with Aviva, so it was a really good match. And I was hoping that Satya could give us a little background on the Verstaq software, and really in the solution that we've used, if he could kind of go through the benefits of that.
Absolutely. So thanks, Robert. What we realize in Waterworks in particular, where there's isolated OT environments, we realize that, one of the goals or one of the methods of securing that environment is to have an air-gapped system. But, with situations like we are in today, with COVID, it is absolutely important to, be able to have remote access, because, you cannot really expect people to be in that air-gapped environment, and it's a different mindset. So having said that, we need to be able to protect those applications by themselves. Those applications are going to have to live in an environment where they cannot be attacked, whether directly by malware or indirectly through security vulnerabilities. Those are the two big vectors that people use to attack applications that are running in situation like the wastewater treatment plant. So in other words, we have to protect against malware and also against vulnerabilities. So what we do at Virsec is that we have a very comprehensive solution that kind of is an application control solution that basically prevents anything other than the dedicated software or the legitimate software that is expected to run in those environments. Everything else gets blocked by default. So that prevents any malware, any known, unknown malware will just simply not get any bandwidth to run at all. And then the other part of this is, many water treatment plants and in reality, many ICS environments have a very hard time keeping up with the patching cycle. So every now and then the patches will arrive from Microsoft or whoever, the operating system, and from the vendors who are providing the software that manages these wastewater plants. And it's very hard to keep up with patching them. So what Verstaq does is it makes sure that even in the face of not having upgraded that piece of software or the operating system, those applications cannot get attacked by a remote attacker. So local attackers attack using malware. Remote attackers use a vulnerability-based mechanism to attack those. And we've seen over a period of time that, if I go back to standard attacks like the Stuxnet, Black Energy, WannaCry, Havix, Industroyer, Triton, it has involved one form or the other of attack. So we've seen, Stuxnet using some really, a combination of social engineering techniques and vulnerabilities in applications to attack the application. Similarly with Black Energy and WannaCry. And we have been able to replicate all of these in our labs and be able to show that, how Versace would actually stop these attacks at very early stages of what is known in the PERA model, the Purdue Enterprise Architecture model, where we are able to protect the applications from being compromised. And if the application keeps on doing what it was meant to do, then the attacker gets locked out. The attacker is trying to make the application do strange things by overrunning, by overtaking the CPU that the application wants to use. And this software, the Versace software, will prevent all of that from happening. And so the net result of this is that, the application can be used by people, even though you may have to open up more and more as we see. More and more people will actually want to be able to access the OT systems in view of pandemics like the COVID that we are going through right now. But then the balancing act out here is you need some really high quality application that or software security controls that can keep the application safe, even though we may have opened the doors, in the OT section.
Yeah, with you bringing up the fact about updating, that's really been typically a trend that I've seen over the years is if it's not broke, don't fix it. I tend to see that a lot, that they just don't come in and update the firmware on hardware. They're not updating the software because they don't know how it's going to impact the packages, and that's just really not something nowadays that they really should be. They really should be looking at how they can stay up with these. So, with a lot of our customers now, we're coming up with an update plan. They have to look at each of these updates that are coming out, see how it's going to impact the software, and if it is something crucial enough that they need to go ahead and implement instead of just sitting back. But for so many years, I've just, you come in and there's still customers that I see running Windows 7. There's even ones still running 2000. So I think that's a pretty unique thing where you had demonstrated to me on some of these where you can still secure a Windows 97 box. But it is a unique software that even now, if I was recommended to a customer they need to stay up to date, you're still going to have that window. So the Versace software, even in that short window, is still going to protect you.
Absolutely. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to jump in there, Satya, because something you were saying really jumped off in my mind. Having those agents there are like having a digital assistant, on site, for your remote workers. So it's kind of the really awesome thing to have. That it's just like, you have someone that is not going to catch the virus that's out there today. We're talking about this coronavirus. So this agent that Versace is going to put on the machine is not going to catch that. But it's nice to know that you've got this sentinel watching out the things that are very difficult to watch, even if you're there on site. But here you can do it, have it be there remotely, looking for things where malware is jumping out, taking control of the memory of a device and executing, bad code, basically, without your knowledge of it. So you actually have someone there on site working for you. I just wanted to interject that. That was kind of a good thing to think about, with your type of agents and sentinels that you have.
Yes, Paul, absolutely a great point that you just made out there. We are like a policeman that's sitting in your application and watching over it at every point. Unlike other solutions, which many other solutions that are post facto, EDR kind of solutions, what they are looking for is some gross level high behavior that they've learned over a period of time, that this is not typical of the application. So there's learning and tuning involved in those solutions. But all that the attacker needs is one little doorway to open, and then bad things will happen at any point. So we are not sitting and watching anything that bad, that is grossly bad, because what that does is it gives the attacker a dwell time of a certain amount of time. And that dwell time is enough. If I give it long enough, it could be days, weeks, months. And the attacker can obviously create havoc as the dwell time increases. But with us, the dwell time is reduced to milliseconds, if at all. The reason being, think of it like an immune system. Our solution basically is observing the application and making sure that it is operating in the guardrails that the developer laid for the particular application. As soon as the attacker tries to subvert the behavior, they need their own code to execute. So what we are doing is we are watching the application as it's executing, and we're constantly asking at every step, is this code still a developer provided code, or is it attacker provided code? And the moment that the switch happens, we are all over it. And so we can actually stop these attacks cold right there and then.
Right. But that's one real point that people don't quite understand. They think that the attacker is going to be coming across the internet and taking one quick shot and infect you and do it all in that 1 microsecond. But that's not the case, as we know. I mean, these attackers come, they have plenty of time. Sometimes they spend a year and a half in a network, finding their way around, doing reconnaissance, finding out what's available, what they can steal, what's worth some money. So the attack itself can take months, and as we knew in the past, it was sometimes like what was it, 250 days before people would even realize that they had an APT or something on the network. And nowadays that's shortened quite a bit. But if you can put that down into milliseconds, then they'd be able to react quickly when those really important changes happen in your network. Then you've got a really good leg up on the attacker.
Just looking at our experience, in some of the installations that we have done with, critical infrastructure customers, be it power grids or Department of Water Resources customers, when we went out there to install Virsec solution, we found that the machines were already infected with a lot of malwares. And the customers were, to your point, Paul, the customers were not even aware of those, malwares being there. So a lot of, these are, living off the lens. They are there for long. They are doing some kind of espionage, sending data, waiting for the right opportunity or the right asset to attack. All those are pivoting from one asset to another. All this happens and people are not even aware of that.
That's a great one. I was actually watching a video or a speech the other day that it was about bit squatting, and this guy had started, he was pulling in some requests from basically sites that had been put on a blacklist that he re-registered after the domain came back up. So he went through and registered every variation of how the URL could be manipulated, and he started getting, requests coming in. And actually one of them was from a water plant. So he actually reached out to the plant and was able to get access to the malware that was at the plant, and he ran it through some of the security. And basically this was undetected. It was something that was 2 years old at the time, and there was no signature for it.
Right.
Running it through. So in this case, like you're saying with the Virsec, it would have caught that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like Satya, and maybe Satya can kind of go back through and explain a little bit, but the whole unique part, I think, for people to get of how Virsec is actually sitting in the memory and already knows prior to it executing that it should not behave that way, rather than looking at it from the outside and trying to say, hey, I'm seeing some strange behavior here. And there are situations where it could already have disrupted something before it actually stops it at that point using other antivirus software.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, Robert, that's a great question. So, typically, what happens is that when you have a malicious piece of software sitting on your endpoint, it could wake up at any point in time and start doing nasty stuff to your applications. So, what we do is we follow a principle called whitelisting. That is only the known good shall be able to proceed. Everything that is not known to be legitimate will not run. So even if the application is, it's a genuine application, but you don't want it to run, even that can be blocked essentially with our solution. So what we do, for instance, is we'll make sure on those endpoints, only the recognized pieces of software will be allowed to run, which you've actually allowed to, which you've programmed to run, will be the only ones that are running. So that makes sure that the application, when it starts up, it's starting up in good condition. But it doesn't mean that, at runtime that the application will continue to do the right thing. If an application has any kind of vulnerability in it, and an attacker is aware of those vulnerabilities, they can take advantage of it and start, maneuvering that application in a way that you don't want it. So just to make up an example here, if let's say you are sitting in a car and using your GPS to go from, let's say, Massachusetts to Virginia, then we kind of know all the paths that will be taken by while you're on that journey on that path. So it's just like the Google map. Google knows exactly what you'll be doing, where you'll be turning, how far you'll be going. And that is achieved by this GPS that's sitting in your car. And as soon as you make a even small deviation out there, the GPS knows that you are diverting from the path that you kind of laid out for yourself. And as soon as that happens, the GPS starts correcting you, sending you back on the right paths and all. So likewise, with what Virsec software does, is it's sitting in memory, as you observed, Robert. It sits in memory and it's watching every turn, every fork that the application is executing. As soon as it executes a little bit different fork, when it jumps from one location in memory to another location where the malicious actor's code might be sitting, we can recognize that right away. And based on a security policy that you might have instituted for your application, we could actually we can block that particular move from occurring. So just like the GPS can prevent you from going off into the weeds and going off in the wrong direction, the Versace software can protect you at every stage of the life of the application, not just from the beginning when it first started, but also at runtime as it's moving around doing its business.
I'd like to go talk with Paul a little bit about, the architecture. I wanted to give him some of the architectures that we use and really get Paul's input on if he has any recommendation. I know, you've been an advisor to Homeland Security, and so it seems like a pretty big trend right now for most of our customers is creating a DMZ, putting multiple firewalls in between. Sometimes I know some customers like to use different manufacturers as they isolate throughout the layers. I haven't been such a huge proponent of swapping up, using Fortinet at one, Cisco at another. On that note, on just even the separate firewalls, what's your recommendation on separating the layers with different manufacturers?
That was a great question, but I would take it a step back further, Robert, because something you said earlier that you really need to address is, the remote access, is it going to be for monitoring or is it going to be for control? right? Both of those things are important, right? But monitoring and control should be separate, right? They should be separate paths that you handle totally separately, give very big restrictions to those that can do control. Say you would have a RSA key, coming into, that point to get into your network, to jump into the DMZ, to a jump server that's going to do a RDP into one of your nodes there. And then when you're done with that, you destroy that node, right? So you want to keep these things as clean as possible. Moving any content, through digital means of making sure that they're signed, checking the signature, moving in by digital means into the factory floor itself before you do your work in that particular way. That being said, if you need monitoring, there's a lot of good technologies out there. Your data diodes are awesome. You'll be able to move direction in one way, just move that data out, be able to display it for the people that need remote access to monitor information. But keep them separate. Keep them definitely separate. As far as different vendors, I'm not a big proponent of that either myself. I like to get really good at a particular manufacturer, really learn all the intricacies of it, all the ways to do things, get on their news groups and work with other people that are working with that manufacturer to find out, is it going to do the job that I want? And once I really know how to set it up, and that's been one of the big problems. I think when we go into networks and to different sites, we'll see those systems that they're not really set up in the most best way to using best practices, right? Creating the rules correctly, using VDOMs correctly, and some people won't even understand what those capabilities are of the vendor that they're using. So there are good vendors out there. I'm not choosing one over the other, but it makes a lot of sense to me to really know that device that you're working with and its capabilities and get good at it, and join those user groups, to make sure that you're actually deploying them the best way possible. DMZs have been around for a long time, as you know, right? Yeah. They're good, right? They're good to have them and to think that way. But, any kind of a technical control is going to, can be compromised. So having multiple DMZs is also good, right? Having a DMZ just for your control system is good, and then another DMZ for the internet itself, right? You can route through there and through all the mechanisms that you're going to need to perform these tasks, but you're going to give yourself that much more, protection. Now, once again, when people talk about layered controls, I'm from R&D, so I think about defense in depth a different way. I try to think about that warm, tender little underbelly of an application itself, and that needs to be protected. So when we design things like that, we want to make sure that we design it in such a way that we expect the next outer layer to fail. Right. So if you get with vendors that think that way, and Virsec is one of those, right? It's so close to that warm, tender little underbelly, that if all the other layers actually fail, then you still have a mechanism in place that can help reduce your attack surface, which is the main goal of a security designer today. If you can say you have one goal as a security architect, reduce your attack surface, right? Find some way to get all those ports closed down, any other paths into your network. And like I said, make sure that if you've got someone that needs to do control, it's a separate path than those that just need monitoring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now, when you talk about, I have seen the firewalls and all that are definitely not going to have any benefit if you just leave them wide open. So do you typically come in, keep them completely shut down, and then start moving to open up the ports, or do you work the other way?
No, definitely, like you say, it is default zero. Default zero access when it comes up. There is no access, and then I open up what I need to get through that firewall and make sure the rule is correct too, making sure it's the direction that it needs as well. Right, so if it only needs one way, you only do one way. Remember to have a rule in each direction if you need it. But and understanding also how to separate things with DDoMs, you know, as well, to keep that more and more separation of your data, right? Not everything is the same. Not if you look at 62443, they have the zones and conduits type of a thinking, you know, that you can separate things. Microsegmentation is really good. The more you can separate, the better it is, right? So you can do these things with a firewall. And a lot of people, when they think about firewalls, they only think, oh, it's going to just protect from the outside. That's the only job it's going to do. And that's not true, right? The firewall can handle all your data paths, especially coming in from the inside, going back out, and making sure all those routes are secure and have only the right information moving from one thing to another, right? So whenever one device talks to another, it's going to move through that firewall, go through a rule, and determine whether or not that protocol is allowed, those IP addresses are allowed, all that stuff, all that segmentation you can do with the firewall today. I mean, it's amazing what those devices are doing nowadays. But they have to be, you have to understand what they can do. You have to actually implement it. Like you say, it's not that you turn everything on and you got a firewall. It's sometimes people just don't really realize when they're creating those rules, you know, how they're supposed to be implemented. And you know, and less is more, right? And like you said, the best way, default, no access. Everything turned off when you turn that firewall on, and then decide what needs to go through there one by one. Right?
Yeah,
a little harder, but you know,
it definitely takes a lot more. You know, you do have to go through, and you've got to understand all the different ports. You know, whether it's just replication of historical data, that if that tier 1 historian is only replicating to the tier 2, then that's the only port that needs to be open for that. Or even if you're on the same network, like you're saying, if the application server needs to talk to the IO server, that's the only port, even though it's at the same layer and not actually, you know, going into a different segment. So there are, like you're saying, even within the micro segmentation. And I wanted to talk with Saurabh a little bit because he's pretty familiar with the implementation of where we started with this pilot test with one of our key customers here in Atlanta, and why we chose to put it in the DMZ. You know, not only to me, it was not only for, you know, protecting the plants coming from the outside, but almost the same as you were saying, Paul, that if something at a lower level got infected, we felt like we put enough resources within the DMZ that needed to be protected. We were replicating all plant historical data to the DMZ. So we felt like if we put Virsec at that level, we were not only protecting the plants, but also protecting that valuable data that was being replicated from all the plants. And but I wanted to get, you know, turn it over to Saurabh to kind of, he's been along this whole journey with us to implement that.
Thank you so much,
right,
Robert.
exactly.
Thank you so much for having me, and also for doing this video podcast. I think it's very timely. Talking about this implementation that we have done with this Department of Water Resources customer in Atlanta, it's been a phenomenal experience for us, you know, for our partnership, and also the protection, the kind of protection that we have offered to the customer. You know, now Satya talked about that there are multiple vectors where the attacker can come in. Right, you know, so, you know, the outside attackers are, of course, you know, are trying to hit you and get in. But the other problem is also the insider attackers. You know, as we have seen in a lot of highly visible attacks such as Stuxnet and many others, you know, the infection came in through a USB drive and so on and so forth. So you need to have a security in place which is like protecting you from within. You know, so basically, something sitting within your application, you know, being a part of your application, sitting in the process memory, and ensuring that the application is only executing what is expected of application, the intended design, and nothing else. So that's what you know, makes Verstaq very, very unique, and that is the reason, you know, because of this differentiated aspect of our security control, the security proposition that we bring to the table. Many you know, renowned players or marquee partners that we have won along the journey, like Schneider Electric is one of our premium partners. We are very, very cohesively working with them, and Paul, of course, has been as a great mentor for Virsec in particular for the ICAS domain. Aviva is another very marquee partner, And the reason, the ICS, Schneider and Aviva, and there are many others, I can't name other ICS vendors at the moment because we are still in the process of making those announcements. So it will be premature for me to talk about those at the moment. But there are other 4 or 5 major ICS vendors who are actually trying and testing our technology and also implementing it in some instances. So they have chosen, they have tested, there's a fair bit of due diligence that we have gone through. Schneider ran a lot of tests. I think it ran for several months after they announced the partnership, and chose us to defend against these targeted attacks that are coming in from nation states, coming in from insiders, that the conventional security solutions are not probably doing a good job of, because the attacks are expanding. They are happening more and more so, in today's time, this unprecedented times because of this pandemic that has come up, that we have all are, gotten hit by. Attack activities have gone up. As anecdotally, I was talking to a large telecom customer of ours. I was talking to the chief security officer out there, and he was telling me that the attackers in their own network, the attack activity has gone up as much as 37 to 40%. Some days, month over month, and there are some days in the week where the attacks are 5 to 6 times higher than what they normally see. So basically, what we have seen that attackers and the malicious actors have always been exploiting or on the go to exploit vulnerable applications, engineering workstations, so on and so forth. And this situation that we are in, the unprecedented scenario that we are in, has made everything vulnerable, because the digital transformation is getting expedited. Companies who were on that journey are trying to expedite, the digital transformation, opening the assets for the remote workforce. People who are not even talking about digital transformation are forced to kind of, do at least some of it, to enable their remote workforces to access the environments, factories, and the disconnected and the air gap sites, which were not the case. So basically, we are opening a plethora of opportunities for the attackers to come in. Now, if that's the case, and of course, this is not just. I don't see this as a very, very temporary thing. I think this situation or this scenario that we are in is going to be changing the way we work, the way we operate, the way we look at things. And I think this is one key aspect. The security and this increased connectivity, remote enablement of workforce will actually bring in a lot of security elements into the picture. And that's where we play the role. And we are very fortunate that we have got, blessings or partnerships with the likes of Schneider, Raytheon, Aviva for that matter. And we are serving, customers in all, pretty much all industrial controls and critical infrastructure companies. You can say, we are working with Department of Water Resources along with you, and power customers, power grids, and then there are many other manufacturing sites, large telecom companies that I talked about. So I think it's really been it's a good journey, and greatly value your partnership and this project that we carried out with you at this Department of Water Resources customer in Atlanta. This is a classic case study, and the beauty is that not only the new software or the new sites that you are bringing up now, along with Aviva or Schneider, the new DCS SCADA system that you're setting up, Verstaq works very well with the legacy one also. So you're talking about the Windows 7 and the Windows 2000 and all that, So Verstaq is we are kind of reverse compatible with the older versions of Windows and the technologies where you don't even have the original developers to support you out there. So that makes us very unique, and more so, we are a bolt-on security. You do not have to make any changes to the code, any changes to the application itself that's being protected. You can just snap us on, and there you go. You don't have to worry about anything else. So great learnings, and we greatly value the partnership with MR Systems. You in particular, Robert, you have been phenomenal, and we look forward to expanding our journey with you and supporting more and more customers.
I've definitely enjoyed working with you guys, and probably really what sold me was Satya's capabilities. When I've seen so many different vendors come in and say how they protect and what they do, and he actually was able to show basically real time what the software could do against these viruses. It wasn't just hypothetical. He kind of started telling me, some scenarios of where, hey, if I breach this firewall, I could pretty much take over any machine. And I was, at the time, thinking, I want to see this. And, sure enough, it was, okay, I'll demonstrate this for you.
Can you attack a firewall?
He basically, breached a firewall and then took over one of the servers. Satya is definitely an extremely talented and smart guy from, I'm sure it goes well beyond what I'm even have witnessed. But I was definitely, sold at that point, and basically our customer was even sold at that point. And, a lot of times I'm not wanting to keep customers, like you're saying, on old technologies, but sometimes it doesn't fit into their budget. So, they may be wanting to get off of the old hardware and get on a new hardware. In the past, upgrading the software and the hardware kind of had to go hand in hand, because, to support a new server, the software needed to support that operating system. So they needed to upgrade, whatever the HMI package was to support that new hardware. And a lot of times now I've been seeing, hey, if we can break up the budget, we can now virtualize these servers, get you off of the old hardware onto, some new hardware with high availability. But maybe at the time you can't, they don't have $250,000 to spend on upgrading the HMI package. So I can come in and just say, hey, we'll stick with the current version of the HMI. And then, next year's budget will allow us to upgrade it. You've already invested in the hardware, but with a software like Virsec, you can pretty much say, hey, I know that software, whether it's server 2003 or something like that, yeah, it's end of life, has its vulnerabilities. But if you have Virsec on this, it would protect you and get you through that small window until you're able to fully upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting point, actually, though. So that's a very strong capability and the use case that a lot of customers are using us for. And not only the critical infrastructure customers, but also large banking and financial institutions are using us for that particular use case, which is like compensating control. A lot of people, including the OT environments, including like large enterprises, they run behind several months. And there are companies and OT customers that we have worked with. They kind of run behind like years, when it comes to patching, because many a times people don't have the patches. They cannot afford to take the assets down to apply those patches, and they just continue to use those assets and software without applying patches, knowing that they are vulnerable and attackable. People can come and attack, exploit that window of opportunity, but they still can't help it. They are running several months, years behind. Now, if Versace is implemented on your software or on your server engineering workstation, what we ensure is that down to the process level, we ensure that the application is working exactly as designed by the developer or the software vendor, like Schneider, Aviva, or many others. So the moment an attacker tries to subvert the original intent of the application, even a vulnerable application, we can catch it in microsecond and launch a protective action against that. So which means that even if you're running a vulnerable application which is unpatched and Versace is deployed on that station, you still are secure. You don't have to worry about. So you can have that peace of mind. There are many other problems for you to worry about and grapple with in these troubled times, but at least we can take away that problem, that your applications are continued to be secured, completely secured, even if they are running vulnerable software unpatched. So yeah, that makes us also, that's a very important use case for us. And that's another very unique aspect that we bring to the table.
And I would like to add, Robert, that you mentioned earlier about the DMZ. The DMZs are typically the cesspool of where the attackers will show up, because we kind of the DMZ by design is accepting people who are not authorized and all. You want to make sure that they're constrained inside the DMZ. So, it's very important to be able to protect the DMZ, as you said, and then, work your way down like you're doing with our customer in Atlanta. So we start with the DMZ, that's the most insecure location, then you protect it, and then you work your way down into the individual facilities, I guess. So, following this principle of, approaching it incrementally is actually one way to eat the elephant, like they say. I would, do one little thing at a time kind of thing. And, starting with a DMZ is a great idea because, that's where the most insecure, pieces or malware can be found. That's been our experience that, the DMZ is like the cesspool, basically, where, the worst of the malware can be found.
Yeah, and to add to this incremental approach, it's a very interesting aspect that we, of course, started on the OT side of this customer, but now we are moving on to the IT side also, because the security control that they've seen and experienced in the last few months, of our working with them together, is now they're expanding Versace into their IT world also. So basically, that's another very interesting aspect of Versace technology that we operate seamlessly between IT and OT networks and systems. So now we are, having our discussions as to how the IT and the enterprise IT applications also of this customer can be secured. So we can have a comprehensive play out there covering the entire landscape of all their sites, all their plants that they the OT environments, so to say, and also the IT environments and IT applications. So that makes us, very comprehensive security solution, cutting across the board.
Now, one thing that Paul brought up that I wanted to get his input on was, I feel like with a lot of the customers that we've had recently that were security conscious, that we've done, taken each process, even at the plant, and segmenting that at the, not just saying, hey, all the controls are on, a controls network. We're breaking it down by process, and we're, trying to provide, the firewalls, the DMZ, but one application that and I know they've been around for a while, I just have not found to where and really how to implement a data diode. And I'd like to kind of see some of the applications where you've implemented that. And I've probably got, even once you dive into that, some more questions around that.
Well, I think, that would be getting into people like Waterfall. They make a very nice product, right? I know him very well as well, their CTO. It's just a matter of actually fooling the TCP packets, right? Because when you make a TCP call, it expects an ACK, acknowledge back. So it's a connection-oriented type of a protocol. So what it's going to do is actually give you a fake TCP ACK back and then pass the message on, and then handle it kind of like a man in the middle. It's really, that's what it is. But it only allows that one-way transport of information, so you just take your historian data or, from one tier to the next, put the data diode between it, or even out of your DMZ into your other office systems that may be consuming that data. You can put it in either one of those places, so actually configuring it, they're not that difficult, but it depends on what you want to accomplish with it. The more sophisticated type ones, they were a little bit mind-boggling to me to make it work the way they said it could, but actually was able to make it do that. But if you just leave it to where it should be, moving data from the plant to an unsecured type of information. So you don't have that capability of moving information back the other way. But sorry about that. But there's one thing that Saurabh brought up, and he just basically touched on it very lightly, but I think it's a very important thing to have in visibility here as we talk about this. You mentioned, the different operating systems and things like that, but what you also have and what we see a lot is there's not just a Schneider control system, right? It's not just a Rockwell or just a Aviva systems. You'll find a lot of different vendors interacting together, right? And sometimes best of breed, sometimes it's what you like to work with. But usually, there's lots of different vendors on the plant floor, right? I'm sure you've seen that, right? Of course. But one of the things that we're promoting now, and I'm sure Virsec will chime in here too. He didn't want to talk about the other vendors in this space, but we share information as vendors in cybersecurity. So we have the Global Security Alliance from ISA that we just started. So that gives us the ability to share information, proof of concepts, technology that we think would work. To us, it doesn't make sense just to secure the Schneider products, right? We want it to be universal because it's a market problem, right? That we're doing, what we're trying to solve. And if we could work with these situations, and Virsec is actually doing this, as those other vendors, they call and they say, hey, well, how did your POC go with this thing? Or what did you have to do to make it all work? And we freely share that information back and forth. And with the CGA, the Global Security Alliance, now it's a really good thing that's going on to share cybersecurity information across the entire, vendor space, as well as asset owners, the people, that they find things that are going on and they want to share with us. And that's also been a really good thing about working with Virsec that I've enjoyed. And I could go back and give you stories like you gave me about meeting Satya. I had something very similar. We could talk about that over a beer or something. But I've seen that they take the information back just as well. So from the time when I first met them a few years back, till their product is today, they've taken a lot of input from the field, from the people like us that have implemented them and said, well, what if we did this? And what if you could do this? And they're very receptive to that. So that's one of the things I've really enjoyed about Satya and Saurabh. The entire group at Virsec, they're very open to making this work in the OT space, and it's not easy, as you know, right? You and I have been in that for a long time, and we understand there are nuances. They're a lot different than the normal IT, where everything needs to be the same, all the nodes have to be the same. In our OT space, it's not the case, right? Everything's different. So the responsibilities of each of the nodes are different. We have more machines than people, right? So they get that, and it's been really good to see the product evolve from these ideas that have come from the OT space. So I just wanted to contribute that as well. So.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, we have been really fortunate to have found you as our mentor, and of course, someone who is as renowned in the field of cybersecurity, especially for the critical infrastructure and ICS. Someone who has been like defining standards for the whole world to follow. How can we not listen to a person like you, Paul? So
no.
It's really been amazing working with you together, getting your inputs, listening to you, and making those changes or making those use cases implemented in our solution. And of course, ICS. Not just vendor, but there are, the inputs that you shared with us were based on real data, the real customer problems, right? They were not academic for that reason. So we have been like, Robert, the other day that we were talking about how Versec demonstrated as to these high visible attacks, be it Stuxnet, Havocs, Black Energy, how we protect against those. If Versec is implemented in any such attack a DWR customer or maybe a power grid, how would Versec handle that? What are the points where Versec technology would intercept those attacks and launch an appropriate protection action? So we did all of that. These were the critical inputs that we got from Schneider and Aviva while we were working on that, the extended due diligence to earn the certification and a partnership with such renowned ICS vendor. We have gone through all that. So once we create a technology which can successfully demonstrate that a Stuxnet kind of attack would be protected in microseconds, you can imagine as to how comprehensive the technology would eventually come out to be. So all those inputs have really been, defining moments for the product, which now is implemented in several customers that some of which we are very closely working with you, Robert, on. So. And I can't thank Paul enough for Paul Schneider team for embracing our technology, guiding us all through, being mentors, and helping us
And
throughout.
I'd also like to add, I was once with Paul, sitting with Paul on his whiteboard. He was dissecting how Triton worked, and we were exchanging notes about how to be able to block it at various levels. Paul's understanding of all of the attack vectors in that space is unbelievable, unparalleled. So, he can talk at the high level, he can talk at bits and bytes, and, he can talk about how to break the kernel, so we've gained a lot by, associating with Paul and tapping into his knowledge.
Oh, Satya, you're too kind. You have definitely been one of my mentors in following you to be able to learn more about memory-based attacks. You've taught me a lot since I've first met you. As you know, I was studying this at the time when we first met. I was trying to figure out how it would be possible to block these ROP-style attacks that were happening. And just to meet you by accident at dinner, and you started talking about your product and things that you were working on, and it got my ear up and thinking about it. But I'm like, Robert, I want to try for myself. So we went down into his lab, started setting up the products, and then attacking them and seeing what would happen. And it's been a great relationship, Satya. I really appreciate your friendship, and Saurabh as well too, and everyone there at Virsec. Yeah, been very open, and I've learned a lot from y'all, really.
So, Paul, you mentioned, that you were also looking, at some of this when you met Satya. Were you looking at how that was affecting Schneider products, or what was your interest at that time that was?
Yeah, right. As being in R&D, I'm always trying to figure out ways to design the products so that they're going to be successfully defend themselves against the different types of attacks that are out there. We study all the attacks, right? We take malware apart, we learn what the malware did, how it did it, and figure out what we can do in software or firmware to protect against these types of attacks. And in some cases, I was just stumped. I was stumped. So, when you've got a ROP-style attack coming at you, and you've got ASLR scrambling your memory, but there's just not enough protection in the ASLR to defeat these guys with the tools that they had. So where I thought ASLR would work, Satya was kind of showed to me that, if you're only 32-bit, you've got one level of protection, but you really need to be 64-bit before that's really going to help you much, And so in my role as a cybersecurity architect, I work in R&D, and I try to find ways to design our products so that they will be resilient, to these type of attacks and be able to stand up against them. Like I said, from the warm and fuzzy level of the kernel itself, and say, I want people to put layers of protection, DMZs, firewalls, smart switches, all the good stuff, microsegmentation. I want all that there, good procedures, good policies. But when it comes right down to the brass tacks, it's some function that I'm going to implement, or some product's going to implement, that's going to unfortunately take 8,000 A's and roll over on his back and allow for remote code execution. So I'm always trying to find ways that we can defend ourselves from the code itself. So this opened my eyes. It was I didn't find products out there that were doing it for me, that would be successfully look at the OT space. And Robert, in our world, even in water, wastewater, there's a big safety element to it, right? You have tanks of chlorine gas there, that's very dangerous, and other chemicals that you need to work with, and just the machinery itself is, these things can hurt people. So safety is so important. And anytime we're going to introduce another partner, another piece of software, another type of technology that's going to interface with ours, it better be safe. It better be rock solid, So that's why we jumped in with both feet. We did an extensive POC. We had systems engineers with 40 nodes set up, pounding it from all which ways, and then attacking it as well. So making sure that it didn't break the product as well, because that's like number one, right? Don't break the software. Don't make it unsafe, right? So that's kind of the way I think about it. Yeah. So. Yeah, is that your question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was, a while back when I was talking to Satya, I was like, why, I would love if they could figure out how to put that technology directly into a PLC, to where it's
Mm-hmm.
actually, or even, getting with firewall manufacturers and start putting them on the devices. Because
Yeah.
I think that would be huge for them. I don't know what the
Mm-hmm.
capabilities are there, but if that's even
Mm-hmm.
a
Right.
possibility.
Well, that's what we do in technology. We work out those ways, and you will probably see that in some time in the very near future, that these concepts that Virsec is using will definitely be able to move themselves into the embedded space for sure. I'm sure you'll start to see that.
So,
Mm-hmm.
not with the firewall at the moment, but there are some other players, ICS players, where we are discussing OEM engagements, where our technology is going to be a part of their new products, probably coming up, say, in 2021 sometime, and major players. It will be again premature for me to announce that, but this OEM play with telco customers, where they are serving large enterprises, SMBs, and government and defense customers, with ICS vendors, some of the router companies, is definitely something that we are pursuing at the moment.
Yeah, some of the first security stuff I've seen is one of the companies that I was working with. They put in some logic that looked at the scan rates of the PLC, and they would sit there and use machine learning to basically put a baseline of what the program should do. It wasn't per a processor, what it should do. It depends on the code for that process. So it could vary across each of the processes, but over time it's going to be a baseline. So that was really probably the only time I've ever seen something at the PLC level where they were trying to figure out. So I think that is a huge area right now that could say it's probably pretty vulnerable. I don't, I'd like to get Paul's take on how vulnerable he thinks, if you breach this DMZ, got all the way down, or someone's at the plant floor level, if you had some of these viruses that you've mentioned or malware, is there anything going on the horizon or that they're working to develop to prevent some of these?
Definitely. There's all sorts of research going on right now, and as you know, we've been through that the attack that we don't probably want to mention today, but that big one, it was a memory-based attack, right, on the PLC itself, and those being able to guard against that. Being on the other side of one of those attacks, it definitely puts you in high gear on the R&D side. So how did they do it? How can we prevent it? Within the code itself. So there's all sorts of things have gone into the next generation of that PLC to help protect it against those sort of things. But technology itself, getting people to move, like you said, some of them are still running Windows 7 or Windows XP. How do you get people to move to the newer technologies? Sometimes, it's just a very hard-fought battle to even get people to patch, to say, hey, we know that there's this big attack going on out there. All you have to do is patch your the OMB version 1. Why not? Right? Why aren't you doing this? You're subject to WannaCry. Eternal Blue. Why don't you put these patches on? Oh, well, maybe it's not going to hit us, or maybe cross our fingers, or there's nothing financial here. But can you imagine if all your control systems were bricked, right? And then someone comes up with a big screen on your HMI and says, "Pay us $1 million in Bitcoin if you want your systems back." What would you do, right? You're going to be just as vulnerable in the OT side as you are on the IT side when you start thinking of all those different attack vectors that you have. right? We were talking about remote access. Are you doing that securely? Talking about USB keys. Are you doing that securely, right? Remember the old days of modems, right? We all had a modem back into the control system, or like Saurabh said, a disgruntled employee. A lot of people are losing their jobs right now, So we have to think of all those attack vectors. And one way to improve your risk or lower your risk from all this is to keep patched, for one, and then observe this newer generations of these devices coming out. I mean, wow, from 16 years ago, where a lot of people are running now, to what's happening today coming out of these vendors, it's just a plethora of different ideas and capabilities, security capabilities. And the standards themselves, they've been evolved. 62443, right? 4-2 just now finally came out for devices, for embedded devices, hosts, network devices, and HMIs and applications. So that took a long time to get that evolved into a place where people could start building to that standard. So I don't know. What we need is to be able, in the meantime, think of other technologies that can help protect us. And it's sometimes just thinking outside the box, right? Maybe we can't change it all, change the world so quickly, but maybe we can bring partners in that can help us, fortify those systems, and then hopefully get people to move to the newest generations that actually embed, technology like Virsec right into the firmware itself. Wouldn't that be great, So unfortunately, we're in a world where we're at war, right? The attackers are constantly learning new ways. We're plugging holes. We're fixing vulnerabilities, coming out with the new technologies to block those attack vectors that are there. And we learn about them more. We spend time learning, but it's a slow process, So it's going to take all of us, though, right? Not just vendors. It's going to take end users to just open the eyes and say, hey, it's time to do something about it. Like, let's all fight shoulder to shoulder and help defeat this thing going on out there. And we have a lot to protect in critical infrastructure, right? Water. Can you imagine the world without water, right? That is, it's the root of life for sure. You need to be able to protect that. You can't say, oh, I'm sorry, you can't turn on your spigot today. You can't take a shower. You can't do this. It's something you can't do without. And water is just one of them. The energy we work in too. We're big in energy. Imagine you couldn't sell something. You couldn't pump gas or run so much of your lights, your home today without energy. There's so many parts of the critical infrastructure that really need our attention. Especially in cybersecurity. We need to open our eyes, be aware, understand what the risks are. I'm not saying, go hold the hog and, the sky is falling, but good hygiene is important, and we can all do it, right? So it's something we can all participate in. You agree?
I definitely agree. And you brought up like the energy and things like that. And in a past life, kind of seeing some of these things, I think they have probably a little easier job where they're not as spread out as far as being managed. To me, these water plants and stuff, for a mandate to come out is really difficult with all of the different municipalities, to where I feel like currently the energy sector may have a little bit of a leg up on the water side. I know that you advise on a lot of these things. How would you really suggest going about, some of these hurdles, some of them that I had kind of listed down as just like the motivation to even invest in them for one. And then really currently, just the need to kind of accelerate this digital transformation for these. But a lot of times, I think that they're kind of, you'll go into some of these smaller towns where they are almost kind of mom and pop. It is a small treatment facility, but those are just as important, but a lot of times they don't have the resources there. So coming in and putting some kind of I just see it as a hard thing to manage from a federal level to really try to mandate something. And I think that they've done their best to put this in there, but still there's a lot of gray areas, I think, because it's not clear cut. It's not a pass or fail really, in my opinion, when they come in. It's kind of left up to the municipality.
Right. You've hit the nail on the head. You asked a great question, right? I wish I had that magic answer for you, but it's just going to take, think of it. You have your phone, I don't know if you can see it, right? You don't think about, how I can go around securing my phone, create some firewalls around my phone, and put a DMZ and all this stuff. But, the technology itself lends towards security, right? It was designed with security in mind, right? The type of architecture in your phone allows for separation of applications and the OS. And as long as you don't jailbreak it, you've got a pretty good protection mechanism there that people can count on. So what it is, technology has advanced quite a bit, right, over the last few years to help protect people and have them not have to be constantly vigilant on their cyber. Of course you want to be, or you need to have that vigilance for sure, but the technologies you can move to that can help you in those arenas, like Versace, just a few years ago, can you even imagine that something would be there monitoring your memory for a memory-based attack that was coming through the wire? There's no virus on the disk, it's all fileless, and how are they going to stop this thing, right? But, looking at their concept of how they do it, wow, they just took a big load off of our minds, right? They say we can protect that vector. We've got a lot of other ones that we're protecting with, we got our firewalls, we got our DMZs, we got our smart switches, we got our BGP, all these other things that we do to make our network safe, in control systems. So we can't let our foot off the gas. But like you say, there's a lot of places that are small. One of the easiest things they can do are, follow best practices. If you get any best practices right off of the ICS cert these days, they tell you, here's a list of things, just don't do it. Right? Don't hang that control systems on the internet. That's a good thing, right? And, things like don't be logging onto your machines as admins. You could block 80% of all attacks by simply not letting your users log into their boxes as admin. That doesn't mean they can't have admin rights on that box. But wow, what a nice procedure to do in a small place. Easy to do, and already you've blocked 80% of the attacks. Being able to put in new technology when the time permits, especially now, right, when things are a little bit slower, and you need to have technology that you can rely on. But like I said, but you can't forget about the people, right? The people process, that whole thing has to work together, that training, so training, get the people trained right away, get them to change the culture itself. And if you change the culture, then everything else kind of falls into play, I used to kind of jokingly talk about, we used to do some work for Shell a long time ago, and when we could tell the Shell employees, because every time they walked up and down the stairs, they would hold the handrail, because it was part of their culture, right? See, that's a Shell guy. Their safety ingrained in their culture. They always hold that handrail going up and down. We need the same thing in cyber, right? And everybody that's doing a control system has to wear that security hat as well. It's not somebody else's job anymore. It's everybody's job. And when you see something, when you see this old HMI running on Windows XP, why? Think of the cost it's going to be if you were, invaded by WannaCry or another one of those, crypto lockers of your system that's going to hold you hostage to get your system back. What are you going to do without your system at all? These attacks cost millions of dollars to some people, and the average attack is getting more and more expensive as you go along, right? So the smaller investments you can make, or the more investments, the first one being the culture change, right? If you could start there, and then everything else seems to fall into place, right? Those best practices that are out there. Let me stop this here. Decline. Okay, sorry. Somebody come on my phone there. It's very difficult, right, Robert? It's not an easy thing, but hopefully we can start there. Use best practices. Observe hygiene. Make sure that we have the proper hygiene. Don't connect to the internet. Don't put your systems on the internet thinking, oh, I just want to remote in from home. Make a good remote access type methodology that you're using. You know, get a jump server. You know, you use an RSA key. Separate it from the people that just need your data, right? That sort of thing. So little by little, you can build even the smallest of systems, all the way down to a phone, right? It's a small thing, but in a lot of cases, it's more secure than a lot of the control systems we see out there today. That's sad, but it's true, right? Yeah. So it can be done, right? Small bites.
We've started using, the two-factor authentication in some applications. Doing it at the privileged access level, so even if you're coming in from the outside, it's going to ask you, for that authentication key that is randomly generated. Plus, even at the plant level, and that's where I wanted to ask you a question with the Schneider stuff is, internally to MR, we've written a lot of our own applications to sit inside of, we've done it with Aviva and with the GE products. The iFix and system platform, OMI, where we've integrated our own two-factor because most of them have like smart card capabilities, but it's not a true two-factor built in. It was just, hey, let me use this card to log me in. Right. So what we've done is we have written our own stuff to use the card, look it up in Active Directory, and then prompt the user for the password. Does Schneider have anything that is on the horizon to kind of integrate, two-factor into any of the applications?
Okay, sorry. Somebody wants me real bad. I think it was my 2:30 call. I can't comment on that. We are constantly in research, trying to figure out. We have implemented two-factor in a lot of our internal systems themselves. We believe in it. We believe it's a good thing to do, right? So you're on the right track, and don't let everybody steer you away from that. Keep pushing to make sure that you get it integrated into your systems as well. So as I can say right now, there's tons of research going on inside of Schneider, how to make things more secure, how to make devices more secure, using secure elements, genuineness, PKIs, maybe the real infrastructure of a PKI that you can trust, not one that's, generated, off your cuff, that sort of a thing. So we have about 100 cybersecurity architects in one group that participates in all this research that we try to do, and we make the specifications, we design how it needs to happen, and then start rolling it out into our products, as it makes sense. But as I said, a lot of these products have been out there for a while. It takes a while to change them, to add this new technology to it. But you'll see a lot of X.509 now for authentication, those capabilities. But definitely we are having some really cool research going on right now with Microsoft themselves, and a new system that they've helped demonstrate too as well, that has this two-factor capability to any device on your network without having to rebuild all these older systems and stuff. So it's definitely on the horizon. Any more than that, I really can't speak to it. But you're on the right track, definitely. Yeah, hold that thought, right?
And Satya, you had mentioned at one point that the unique application or kind of y'all's proprietary memory-based security that even Microsoft had tried doing something similar to that. Can you kind of go into a little more detail of the competitors and why that is completely unique to you guys, and that there are other people that have tried doing that, but basically that is something unique to you guys. Even if someone else did come up with how to figure that out, would they be able to? Would they actually be able to do that, or do you completely have that basically patent in place that no one else could do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of our technologies, we have at this point, we have about 30 patents that cover various aspects of our technology. But as you rightly mentioned, Microsoft made an attempt at that particular technology from Microsoft is called Control Flow Guard. And Paul and I have talked about it in the past. The problem with Control Flow Guard, it is a protection on the forward path. So the CPU, think of the CPU as an engine. It kind of moves forward and then suddenly switches from point A to point B. And when it switches from point A to point B in memory, that's where attackers are trying to take advantage of. So sometimes it happens on what is called a call boundary, and sometimes it happens on the return from the call boundary kind of paths essentially. So Microsoft's technology is available in Windows 10 and going forward, and it requires software to be compiled with those set of switches, and it protects on the front end, on the call boundary, but not on the return boundary. So going forward, I can see how 4 or 5 years, and given the propensity of the ICS industry to use older software and not patch it, I would assume that in a few years that they would be able to adopt reap the benefit of this Control Flow Guard technology. But the issue there is that if you have not baked it into your product, then you don't get the advantage of it. With Virsec, the big advantage is you don't have to bake it into your product. Every time you ask somebody to open up an application and rebuild it, you're kind of creating resistance out there. And but what's even better is if I have a hands-free approach, or if I give the same level of benefit without making the developers suffer through all of this, that would be a huge step forward. So this is where we believe that our big advantage over Control Flow Guard type technologies are that we protect on both the edges, the forward and the return paths, and we also protect and this, by the way, you can, if you think about your own software, you can put these hooks from Microsoft in your own software. But if you look at today's technology, today's applications, they're composed of lots of applications that come from, or code that comes from elsewhere. So even if you kind of protect your own code, you would not be protecting code that came from third parties. So it's like excuse me, it's like having solution. You have 5 doors in your home. You can lock them, 3 of them down, but the other 2 are kind of kept open. The end result is going to be the same, pretty much. And if a lot of these attacks happen, the attackers are looking at they don't care if you've locked your door on the call boundaries, but not on the return boundaries, and they'll take any advantage that they can. So the solution has to be very well, it has to be integrated. It has to be a bolt-on solution, and it has to be able to protect not just the call boundary but the return boundaries as well. And from that perspective, I can see Versace checks all those boxes, but other technologies don't. So
and also technology agnostic, which Microsoft is not, because they will only protect applications written in Microsoft languages, operating systems.
That's right.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So our
guys,
of course, most of the ICS world is kind of Microsoft, but we have capabilities on Linux and other platforms too. So that gives us a distinct advantage. When you come, of course, ICS per se, as I said, is predominantly, a lot of it runs on Microsoft, but Microsoft technology. But when you talk about the IT, enterprise IT, Linux, Red Hat, are the big players out there. So the technology has to be agnostic and has to cut across the widest spectrum of technology and server base and languages and so on and so forth. So we comply to that.
And as Saurabh, you rightly mentioned, the IT and the OT are melding, kind of in many ways. So all that an attacker has to do is make their way into the IT network, and they'll eventually find themselves into the OT network. Those boundaries are kind of getting blurred now, as we open up, especially in these days when we are talking about COVID-19 affecting how people work. And so, we have to have a solution that's kind of comprehensive. It shouldn't be like a point solution. It works for this scenario, but not for that scenario. That is really a very important point, Saurabh.
Right, exactly. And that's the reason, actually, there is a video testimonial that we got from Aviva on exactly that point. The reason they're choosing Versec as a security partner for digital transformation is exactly the same point, because as a part of digital transformation, you're making, IT and OT systems converge, a lot of OT systems. And then you need also a technology which can also converge or maybe seamlessly operate across the two layers. Now, there are a lot of OT security vendors, some legacy, some new age, that but they focus only on the OT side. Good players, but they have limitations that they would only play on the OT side. And there are the legacy and the conventional security controls that you have been, like, for the last 2 or 3 decades, that you have been knowing or using on the IT side. But they do only on the IT. They claim that they do something on the OT, but if you put a system which requires consistent signature upgrades in an air-gapped environment, then probably you are just it's a funny situation, or I would rather not comment on that. So basically, you need a technology which can cut across seamlessly when you're talking about the true digital transformation. Now, this forced situation that we are in, when I started when talking in this particular video, I was talking about because of this pandemic that we are in. Digital transformation is being forced. Some people are expediting that because they were already on their journey, and some people are forced to kind of mend the two together. So that is opening a lot of doors for the attackers, and attackers have been attacking application vulnerabilities. They are like ruthless, merciless people, and they always, most of the times, work from home. So situation has not changed for them, but for us, situation has changed because a lot of new windows for them to get in. There are a lot of new opportunities, vulnerabilities in applications, engineering workstations, SCADA, DCS layers. And of course, people are vulnerable too, and they are taking advantage of that, which is sad, but that's been the case all along. We recently won a very large deal with a probably one of the largest healthcare provider in I would say Europe. They are fighting, it's the hospital or the health chain. They are fighting this, they're treating patients, like thousands of them, and in this situation, they're massively getting attacked, like pretty much on an everyday basis. A new ransomware is coming in and hitting them, and they don't have time to deal with it. So they have chosen Versec as the technology to protect against those ransomware attacks, because they're just enough of it. So they actually had plans before COVID was not there. COVID-19 wasn't there. This implementation of security control would have taken place sometime in August, September timeframe, but they pulled it ahead of time. So they are doing it now in May. So they have chosen, first of all, they did a very short POC with us. I would say record sales for us. Like in 12 days, we could end to end, right from the first meeting that we had with this customer to the closure of the deal that we won. Happened in just 12 days. And it's a massive implementation plan. But these are the times when people have to take those decisions, because you can't risk your customers, your employees, your business stakeholders, everybody in the ecosystem. You have to you have to think about it, and you have to talk about, or you have to think about the most comprehensive technology which actually protects you not from one kind of attack, but comprehensively. So Versec fortunately fits the bill for most of the customers, whether they're grappling with OT attacks, IT attacks, ransomware attacks. Our technology is very, very differentiated, and we are happily, I know these are tough times. Business is one part, but we are fortunate that we are in a field where we can really help our customers and basically the society by protecting them from these attacks, ensuring that our DWR customers would continue to offer uninterrupted water supply, and if we are contributing in some way to that cause, we feel very fortunate.
And we are lucky right now too that that we are fortunate, because if some of this would have happened 20 years ago, being able to support this infrastructure would be much more difficult. You know, I mean, obviously you got to put in some thought and use, you know, things like Versec or, you know, just different technologies to secure that, but at least there is the infrastructure there to support this remote work and things. But even outside of just this pandemic, you know, it is, especially for the water industry, I see it a huge benefit for them to not be air gapped and really working in a silo, because there's so much information, and they're not, you know, it's not like pharmaceuticals or something like that to where they have competitors that they're not going to share this information, you know. So I think society as a whole, even outside of this pandemic, the sharing of information is really important. You know, whether it's, you know, blower operations, how to make things more efficient, whether it's down to the processes. There's so much data that, you know, whether it's artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that, that it is beneficial, you know, to breach beyond having these plants air gapped. So, you know, having a solution like Versec, where you do not have to, you know, have you know, they don't have to actually, the virus comes out and you got this time frame to put the patch on and all that, is basically you're protecting from a virus that has, you know, hasn't even came out yet.
Absolutely. So that's you know, commonly known as zero-day attacks. You know, the attacks that are exercising vulnerabilities for the first time, where there's no signature. People don't have any idea, information as to how the attack would come in, what vector, what shape and form, what payload. Versa can protect against those zero-day attacks also. And, you know, of course, it's important, as Paul mentioned earlier, that the situations, the times have changed. You know, the core competitors that they are, like with other names in the ICS, but they are collaborating to ensure that, you know, the customers and ultimately the consumers and the businesses are protected. So attack information are being exchanged with the core competitors. They are not hiding information, which is like a great thing. You know, as you mentioned, that you know, the industry is also kind of collaborating, coming along to help in situations like this.
Well, I appreciate you guys joining me today. And
Thank you.
I appreciate you having us. Right.
It was great meeting you, Paul, and I'm thankful that Satya and Sarah introduced me to you, and hopefully I'll get to meet you in person, maybe after we're able to actually get out of our house.
Exactly.